Welcome to Project Command. I'm Captain Peter Younes, and I'll be your host. On today's episode, we're going to discuss technical debt in the fire service. What is it, how it slows our work down, and how we can prevent and eliminate it. But first, if you're enjoying this podcast, it really helps us if you like, follow, and share this episode with a friend. Remember that every share helps more fire service professionals learn the skills and mindset to deliver stronger, smarter projects. Now, let's get to the episode. Hey, welcome everyone. Welcome back to Project Command. On today's episode, I want to talk about technical debt, or as I like to call it, the 90% problem. So think about this. Fire departments run dozens and dozens of projects every year. New equipment, new software, new operational programs, maybe new processes. And partly because we're running so many projects, but just also because the operational tempo of fire departments is so high right now, many of these projects only make it to about 90% done. And after that, we just kind of move on to, we get the importance or what we think is the important stuff done. We roll out the new equipment, we activate the new operating system or whatever, and we miss that last 10%. And the problem with that is that last 10% tends to be where the actual integration work lives. This is things like policy development, training, communication, documentation, and we'll get more into that. But suffice it to say that 10% that we leave on the table tends to be that the part that's actually needed to integrate our project into operations of the fire service. So what happens when we create this technical debt? It creates a hidden drag on all of the other things that we're working on. So big problem. And, sometimes it can be hard to know specifically if you have mountains of technical debt, but there are a couple telltale signs. The first telltale sign, and this is basically straight out of the Project Management Institute PMBOK, if you start to see a decline in the velocity of the work your team is doing, meaning maybe you were getting one or two projects done a month and now all of a sudden it's one, and then maybe it's one project every 3 months, and it just gets slower and slower and slower, and you can't figure out why. That is a telltale symptom of increasing technical debt. But beyond that, what I've found is when departments have a mountain of technical debt, meaning, bunches and bunches of projects that are at 90%, and we think they're done, like we've called them done, but we didn't get that last 10% done. What I've noticed happens is you start to get this feeling like you're drowning, like there's a million projects going on, there's a million things going on. And so what I would say is if you find yourself in a position where you have seen your work get slower and slower and slower, the velocity is getting slower and slower and slower, and you feel like you're drowning in work, there's a very high likelihood that what you're actually drowning in is technical debt. And so if that's the case, then this episode is for you. Okay. So let's talk about what technical debt is specifically in the fire service. Now, the concept of technical debt comes from the software world, but I've found that it's a really relevant concept for us. And I've been talking to a few different fire service leaders about this recently, and people that we're going to have on the podcast soon. And all of them have agreed, yes, this is definitely something we're seeing in our organization and have seen in the fire service more broadly. So let's talk about how technical debt forms. So think about the projects that we're running day in and day out. Let's take a technology rollout or an equipment rollout project. This is basically like you have a new thermal imaging camera, or you have a new 12-lead monitor, or you have a new radio, or you have a new MDC, whatever. You have something that's new that you need to push out to your workforce. Now, we do this kind of project multiple times a year, 2, 3, 4 times a year in every department. And I did a whole episode on how to get equipment in service, which I recommend that you listen to. But because we're running this project so much, this is a great example because I think we can very clearly see the things that don't get done on an equipment rollout. So The priority, of course, in an equipment rollout is to get the equipment rolled out. So we get the new thermal imaging cameras at the fire stations, and we're so relieved that we finally got this project done. We're like, oh man, all right, let's move on to the next one. But we forget to write a policy saying, hey, this is how we expect this equipment to be used. This is what you should do if it breaks, and on and on. We maybe don't provide the right training on it. Maybe we provide a little bit of training, but not enough. And the communication. We miss the communication. We don't say, hey, this is where we want this equipment to be stored, and this is how we want it to be cared for, and this is who's the program administrator if you run into any issues, and contact this person if you need help with this thing. And so we don't do those, those kind of handful of things. And I picked those particularly because those are the first things that get dropped off at the end of the project. And so what happens when we don't do those? Okay, so we got our equipment out, but we didn't do those things. Next thing you know, you're going to have people that don't know how to use or maintain the new equipment. Okay, so now you're going to get emails, hey, how do we do this? How do we do that? Or, hey, we tried to use it for this and now it's broken and we need a new one. And maybe we have the money to replace it, maybe we don't, but now you have a sort of a headache around that. Next thing you know, supervisors are getting hammered with repetitive questions, the same question over and over again. Mistakes happen, equipment is damaged, you're sending out frantic emails to the whole fire department saying, hey, don't do this or do this. And it makes you look disorganized. It makes us look reactive. It makes us look like we don't have our stuff together. And these problems are going to continue to surface week after week, month after month. But it's not just for that project, because this happens at scale. So now we have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 projects that were at 90%. And so all those things I just listed are happening for every project that's at 90%. And so when we think about it like that, it's really just easy to see how we get this mountain of unfinished work, this mountain of technical debt, all these projects that are so close to being done, but there's like 2 or 3 things missing. And because of that, we're flooded with extra work. And that extra work puts a downward pressure on the projects that we have, or just the work that we have right now. And so it starts to slow it down. And the more technical debt that accumulates, the slower it's going to make the work that you're doing, which then means more projects are only going to get to 90%. And then the technical debt grows and grows and grows. Okay, so let's move now into what can we do to prevent technical debt? And then after that, we'll talk about what do you do with the mountain of technical debt that you already have. Okay, so how to prevent technical debt. Now, the first one is kind of a broad one, and that is to create a culture of organized project management. And obviously, because this podcast focuses on project management, that's something I feel very strongly about. But when you have an organizational culture that says, hey, when we run projects, we don't just run off and attack the low-hanging fruit. We focus on a organized, methodical approach to project management, which includes closing projects the right way. And there is a right way to close a project. Again, whole episode on this. I think what is it called? It's called How to Close a Project, Closing Projects the Right Way. Highly recommend you check it out. But creating an organizational culture that values high quality projects is critical for avoiding technical debt. All right, next. One of the things that I like to do, and I implemented this probably a year and a half ago in our organization, and it's a document review at the beginning of a project. So here's what that looks like. Let's say we are doing a project to roll out a new staffing software like Telestaff or something like that. The first thing, or what, not the first thing, but one of the first things I like to do, I have my team meeting, maybe it's my first or second team meeting, and I'm handing out assignments. All right, you start researching this, you do this, you do that. One of the things that I like to assign very early on is a document review. So I'll say, hey, Chris, do a document review all of our policies, all of our SOGs, all of our protocols, and look for any of them that mention our staffing software and just flag them. Don't do anything with them yet, just flag them. And the deliverable that you get from this is after a week or 2 or 3, that person will come back and they'll have a list and it'll say, these are the 4 policies and the 2 protocols that reference our staffing software. Okay, great. Now we know what needs to be updated or replaced throughout this project. So just that small step is really valuable because first of all, it keeps the idea of a document review to get those policies updated. It keeps it kind of at the top of mind, but it also lets you get a sense of how much work it is. Sometimes it feels like updating policies is a lot more work than it really is because we don't know how much work we actually have to do. So having that document review done, and you can just say, oh, look, we only have 2 policies we got to update. Not that big of a deal. That can really help make sure those policies get updated at the end of a project. Okay, another one, and this is such an important one, guys, such an important one, and that is including the right stakeholders early. Now, here's why that actually helps. I told you the 3 biggest things I see that lead to technical debt are communication, training, and policies. So we talked about policies, how to make sure those policies get done. Now let's talk about training. And this is where having the right stakeholders comes into play because I love to include training or whoever represents your training section or does work on training projects. I love including them as a stakeholder because they're going to have such an important role in helping you coordinate the training for your project, and bringing them in early is a way of making sure that you don't miss that, or that when you do bring them in, it's not later on in the project after we've already put stuff together, after we've already tried to roll out some training and it didn't work. Bring them in at the beginning and let them help you come up with the best way to train your organization on whatever your project is about. Okay, and the last one I want to give you is protect time at the end of a project for the project closeout. And this one is specific to you, the project manager, okay? Because you're the one that decides for the most part when your project is done. And so you have your equipment rollout, you've gotten your equipment in the stations. Now it's up to you, the project manager, to remind everybody, hey, this project is not done. We need 2 more weeks, and in those 2 weeks, we're going to update this policy and this policy. We're going to ensure that everybody feels adequately trained. We're going to put out maybe we'll do an end user survey or something. We're going to review all of the documentation for the project and put it together into a neat project closeout report so that we don't lose those critical lessons learned. And then we're going to present that project closeout report to our project sponsor, which is the person that authorized the project, so that we can review together whether the project is done. Hey, this is what we delivered. These are the policies we updated. This is the training we put together. This is the communication that we've done surrounding this project. So protect some time at the end of that project to make sure that we get all of these critical things done. Okay, now let's talk about how do you eliminate your existing technical debt. Now I want to level with you. There's going to be some work related to this, but I assure you this is the juice is worth the squeeze here. Taking some time or even just putting together a project to eliminate your technical debt is probably one of the most valuable things you can do with your time in fire administration. Because until you address this, it's going to continue to slow down all of the rest of your work. So this is this should be a big priority for any fire department administration especially if you have a lot of it, to address your technical debt. And here's just a basic way to go about doing that. There's a lot of ways, and I'd love to hear how organizations out there are doing it. So feel free to send me an email, projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what your department is doing about this. But here's my plan. So the first thing I would recommend doing is, and I would include various different people who have a good sense of what's going on in your fire department administration. So put together that team. And then you're going to list all of the projects that are those 90% projects. Hey, this equipment got rolled out, but we didn't do this, this, and this. Or, hey, we rolled out this new telestaff system, but we didn't do this, this, and this. So make that list of all of your 90% projects. Okay? Then you're going to identify which one is the smallest technical debt, meaning, hey, this one, all we need to do is send out these 2 emails about how we want this equipment to be maintained, and it's done. Okay, great. Well, that's a very small one, so let's just do that first. And if this sounds familiar, it's kind of based off of the Dave Ramsey debt snowball. Dave Ramsey's a guy who does like financial advising, and I mean, he's got some good stuff. I'm not, a Dave Ramsey acolyte or anything, but I think he's got some good ideas. And one of them is the debt snowball. And basically, like if you owe a bunch of money, you start with your smallest debts and you pay them off, and then you go to your medium debts and you build momentum in getting rid of all your debt is the idea. And so that same concept can work here with our technical debt. We want to start by identifying our smallest elements of our technical debt and just knock them out, get them out of the way. Okay, then that clears up a little bit of our bandwidth. We lift a little bit of that downward pressure, that drag, and then we're going to start to see modest increases in our team's velocity. Now we move on to the medium debt and then the large debt. And as we pay off more of this technical debt, as we push out those training plans, put out an FAQ on that new equipment that you rolled out, fix that software patch with your such and such system, provide training on this thing and that thing, what you'll start to see is that you're gonna see an increase in the speed that your organization is working at. Less downward pressure, less drag equals higher velocity. So that means fewer interruptions, less rework, faster project completion, better morale, a sense that we have a more organized workplace, increased clarity and stability, and greater organizational capacity. Okay, so those are some really big things. So very important that we, and again, I think it's worth putting together an entire project to address this and doing it like you would any other project. You start by collecting your requirements, put together a scope, put together a team, and attack that technical debt. Okay, guys, let's do a quick review here. Technical debt is all of the work that is caused by unfinished projects that are at 80 or 90% but aren't quite done, and as a result, there's work still trickling in from them. And when you stack enough of those undone or unfinished projects on top of each other, what you end up with is a steady stream of small but persistent tasks that are going to pull your attention away from the work that you're trying to focus on now. What that does is it creates a feeling of chaos, a feeling of disorganization. It decreases your organizational velocity and capacity by pulling you and your team's attention away from what you're working on now to focus on what you thought was already completed. How do you prevent technical debt? Well, the best way is to create a culture of organized project management. But beyond that, we're going to begin a document review at the beginning of every project. We are going to include correct stakeholders, a comprehensive list of our stakeholders on every project and early on in the project. And finally, we're going to protect time at the end of our project to ensure that all of the loose ends are tied up. Finalized policies, delivering training, publishing communication, updating any documentation, putting together a good, solid project closeout report, and documenting those critical lessons learned. And if we do those things, what we will see is a substantive reduction in our technical debt and a substantive increase in our organizational capacity and velocity. Technical debt hides in the everyday. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's just the quiet backlog of things we never fully finished. So here's a challenge for this week. Pick one thing that's sitting at 90% in your organization and close it out. One policy finalized, one communication sent, one training completed. Take small but concrete steps towards getting your organization's velocity and capacity back. Thanks for listening to this episode of Project Command. If you enjoyed today's episode, remember to share it with a friend. And if you have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, send us an email at projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. That's projectcommandpodcast@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it either directly or on air in a future episode. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Captain Peter Younes, and this has been Project Command, bringing command level thinking to every project in the fire service.